Welcome. I'm Claudine Wong with KTVU Channel 2 News, and welcome to a discussion with Sheriff David Livingston, the present sheriff of Contra Costa County. Today's discussion is sponsored by the Contra Costa County Elections Division and Contra Costa Television, and we are recording this in the studios of Contra Costa Television. We should mention that we'll also be having a discussion following this with Sheriff Livingston's opponent, so we'll be asking similar questions as well. Sheriff, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So let's give folks an introduction. You were first elected sheriff back in 2010. You ran unopposed in 2014 and 2018. You do have an opponent in this race. Talk about your campaign and what you see moving forward for the Sheriff's Department.
Well, we've got broad support across the county, as I have in prior elections, and really this is about experience. I've been the police chief of Pleasant Hill, was the police chief of Concord, and have served as sheriff now for 11 years, going on 12 years. I have over 30 years of law enforcement experience, plus I'm an attorney. It's important in these critical times to have an experienced leader running a sheriff's office of over 1,000 employees. And we touch every corner of the county, whether it's direct patrols and unincorporated, whether it's assisting other police departments, working with our federal partners, the FBI, and of course, running a very large jail facility for those inmates that are remanded into our custody by the courts. We also operate the civil unit throughout the county. I am the elected coroner as well. So there's many facets, and I think I bring the experience, the temperament to be the sheriff for the next term in Contra Costa County.
Let's talk about priorities. You listed a lot of different areas that the sheriff covers, but what is topping the list of most important priorities should you be reelected?
Well, first of all, we're fighting to add deputy sheriffs to patrol so that we can improve our response times and have even more deputies out on patrol. And the Board of Supervisors last week indicated support for adding over 30 new deputy sheriffs into patrols throughout the county. So we're very excited about that. We want to get those up and running right away. Transparency is critically important. For the last 5 budget years, I've fought to add money for body-worn cameras for all staff. We finally achieved that goal with the Board of Supervisors. It's over $1 million a year, believe it or not, for a county of our size. We have over 1,000 employees. And so we want to make sure we have transparency and full body-worn cameras, and we'll do that as well. And then alternatives to mental health response calls. If we don't have to send a deputy sheriff or a police officer to a mental health crisis call, then we should send someone more suited, a clinician, for example. I'm 100% behind that. I agree that that's a great program. There's many different programs out throughout the county, all of which we're participating in, and reserve the response for police or sheriff to those mental health calls only when absolutely necessary or when there's violence involved, etc. So there's a lot of initiatives. Again, that's why we need leadership, experienced leadership in the sheriff's office, and I think I'm that person.
Well, you mentioned mental health, and certainly that has been a big discussion in recent years. The last several years have really brought on some new challenges, whether it was the pandemic or a closer look at policing and how it's traditionally done and maybe how it can be changed. Can you talk about how maybe your viewpoints have changed over the last several years since you were first elected to how you view it now, and what needs to be done maybe moving ahead?
Well, obviously, response and training for our deputies is critically important, and we've done that. In fact, I required mandatory training for all employees, not just sworn employees, but all in implicit bias training so that our staff, whether it's in a office setting or in the field, understand the issues that come into play when interacting with the sheriff's office employee, and also de-escalation techniques and training that goes on not only in the basic academy, but in service training. That's continuous training for our deputies. Obviously, the goal is to have zero negative interactions with the public. Frankly, that's not always possible. Sometimes our officers are put in very dangerous situations. They have to make split-second decisions. And when they do, and if they're within policy, I will support them. But as sheriff, regrettably, I've had occasions where I've terminated employees, including sheriff's deputies, for conduct that's inappropriate. So there has to be accountability. We have that. And I think the key is de-escalation in the field, it's training, and it's building community trust and relationships, something that we've been doing very successfully for many years, and that will continue under my leadership.
So in terms of characterizing where the department stands now and how much room need to grow there is, how would you characterize that?
I think there's always room to grow and improve. Really, the challenge right now is to get qualified deputy sheriffs in the door. It's a challenge across our profession. Fewer and fewer people are interested in becoming police officers or deputy sheriffs. But we have a very extensive background process. We hire about 2 or 3 out of every 100 applicants that then become deputy sheriffs. So I'm very confident, very proud of the staff that we have out there. But through that training, through that continued community interaction, we can always improve. And any large organization has to always be improving and looking over the horizon. And I think we're doing that pretty well.
I do want to ask you about former police officer Andrew Hall. It's been a source of controversy. You've spoken out in support of him in the past. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 years for the death of Vladimir Arboleda in November of 2018. You've mentioned mental health issues coming up. Can you give your thoughts on how the department and the community moves forward from this and lessons learned and where you stand on his case now?
So obviously a very controversial case, and I have stood up and supported Deputy Hall. Now, he was charged obviously with manslaughter from our district attorney. The jury did not believe that that was the case. He was convicted of a lesser offense of using a firearm, which ironically he's required to carry in the performance of his duties. But in that case in particular, any death involving a citizen is tragic. And my condolences to the families involved in that case. But the reality is we had no idea that we were interacting with a mental health patient of any kind. All we knew is a person was seen suspicious in the streets of Danville going door to door. We approached him, we found him. There was a short, slow speed pursuit. He pulled over. We walked up to the car. The person then took off quickly. And then we formed a barricade there off of Diablo Boulevard. We thought he would stop there. And obviously that's when he tried to thread through with his vehicle, and Officer Hall made the actions and took the actions he did. Tragic case, no doubt. But in our thorough review of the case, we believe that he was within policy and within the law. I disagree with charging an officer for a split-second decision. They're out there day in and day out protecting us and protecting our families. And one other important point, Deputy Hall was on service, on post for 2.5 years after that, handling thousands of calls with diligence and with respect and receiving commendations. And then the district attorney 2 years later decides to charge him out of the blue. So there has to be a basic notion of fairness here. And I don't think that happened in the Hall case. Again, tragic. I feel for the families, but these officers will receive my support, as I said in the memo, if they're within policy, if they're obeying the law, and if they're acting with honor. A lot of people don't report that point, but that was in the memo that I said and put out to support that deputy.
All right, Sheriff. I do want to talk about one more issue before we conclude our discussion and get to your closing statement. Can we talk about crime? Certainly people remember the mob robberies we saw over the holidays, and there are a lot of people talking about the rise in crime that we're seeing. How do you address that?
Well, one thing we did immediately was render our services as the sheriff's office to any police department that needed assistance. In fact, very few people know we put out deputies immediately to assist and augment Walnut Creek's patrols during the holiday season when we anticipated potentially additional crimes there, additional thefts, or even mob thefts. I have zero tolerance for criminal conduct. If someone's convicted and they're remanded into my custody, we provide every service available to them: rehabilitation, reentry, education, etc. But if they victimize people in the field, if they break into your home, if they steal your catalytic converter, if they threaten you on the roads, if they act in groups and smash and grab across Walnut Creek, as we all saw, it's completely unacceptable. And so we will be proactive. We will arrest people. And I would ask and hope that our district attorney would hold them accountable. We're half of the equation. We do the enforcement, but we also need a partner in the DA's office who will hold these people accountable and issue charges and not say something like, well, if they needed the things they stole, I'm not going to charge them. Lululemon lost over $500,000 in merchandise in Walnut Creek, as an example.
Yeah,
I mean,
Sheriff
come on.
Livingston, I want to just cut you off only because I want to give you 2 minutes to make your closing statement, which obviously you can finish your thought within there, but I don't want to take away any time from your closing statement. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's been an honor to serve as sheriff of Contra Costa County for the last 11 years. I have the experience, as I mentioned earlier, 30 years in law enforcement, past president of the California State Sheriff's Association. I've been a police chief in Concord, a police chief in Pleasant Hill. I have a bachelor's degree, a law degree, and I work very well with elected officials from every corner of the county, as a good sheriff should. I'm nonpartisan. I work with Republicans, with Democrats, with independents. And the reality is, my goal is public safety, not politics. I have one goal as sheriff, and that's to keep Contra Costa County families safe. And that's exactly what I intend to do as sheriff, if reelected, to serve another term. And we will be a cutting-edge law enforcement agency. We'll provide excellent service to the community. We'll stay ahead of the training curve, and we'll adopt and embrace technology to make us even more effective. So I do hope that people consider me for re-election as your sheriff on June 7th. And thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sheriff, for your time and your thoughts, and we appreciate it. And this does conclude our discussion with Sheriff David Livingston, who is running for re-election. I'm Claudine Wong with KTVU Channel 2 News. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to join and vote on June 7th. We'll be right back to meet and hear from the other candidate for Contra Costa County Sheriff. Welcome to a discussion with Benjamin Theriault, who is running for sheriff in Contra Costa County. Good morning, Mr. Theriault.
Good morning.
And thank you so much for joining us. Okay, let's first give people an introduction and get to know you. You were in the Air Force Security Forces, I know, and joined the Richmond Police Department in 2009, and now president of the Police Officers Association. Tell us a little more about yourself and why you think you should be sheriff.
Yeah, well, like I said, I grew up in Western Montana. I'm a Native American man, and I learned about law enforcement and my desire to be in law enforcement as a young man. My father was the tribal chairman, and my interactions with our tribal police as a boy, that's what led me to want to be a police officer. And I pursued that engagement in this honorable profession my entire life. I have been committed to 21st century community policing, which is something that we have practiced tremendously at Richmond. And I'm currently in my 14th year there, and have a vast amount of experience in labor relations and law enforcement policy locally and at the state level. I've been involved in legislative law enforcement reform, and I represent over 9,000 law enforcement professionals in the Bay Area as the Bay Area POUR Act director. I'm engaged in Contra Costa community as a member that serves on 3 nonprofit boards that serves for healthy youth lives and ensuring that they stay away from pathways of incarceration. And I'm running for sheriff because I believe the office is devoid of leadership. We have made and continue to make smart reforms within law enforcement, and our sheriff is our elected law enforcement leader, unfortunately has been absent from these conversations. The sheriff's office is really important, obviously, for public safety, and for 12 years, while the sheriff has been in office, we now have crime on the rise. Law enforcement is, in my opinion, being held down by social service issues that we were never designed to handle, and I think that's the change. I want to be an elected law enforcement leader who is proactive and on the cutting edge of our profession, not reactive. I want to lead in changing our structure of public safety and providing deputies on the street to respond to our basic 911 calls for all of the communities in Contra Costa. I want to focus on crime data analysis to solve crimes for victims, data transparency, ending law enforcement as a primary response to mental and behavioral crisis, and finally, accountability for our actions and accessibility. And as sheriff, I plan to be the kind of leader that will usher in that change.
All right, you mentioned a lot of topics, a lot of issues that obviously face communities and face police departments. But let's talk about priorities. You have said your message is one of engagement. You've mentioned a couple of other issues. So you're topping the list. Day one, if you were elected as sheriff, what do you go in as topping your priority list?
The top priority as sheriff day one is to create a advisory council of groups and people from across the county to get buy-in and talk about the policies and procedures of the sheriff, understand where people are coming from and what changes they would like to see, but basically have a community-led effort to ensure that we are working with every different aspect, every different group from across the county and for public safety. And then that allows a level of accessibility and transparency that, quite frankly, has been missing. And I think it gives people buy-in that they are helping solve public safety issues. And I value that, and I want to make that happen within the first 100 days in office.
We talked about the last several years. It's been rough. We've had the pandemic, but we've also had a much closer look at policing in general. And you touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about how maybe your viewpoints have changed on how law enforcement conducts itself and maybe what needs to be done moving ahead?
Like I said, I think it's important that we're not the standard response model for everything that has to do with mental and behavioral health crisis. Right now, there's a growing call to change that, and everyone who is out there watching this, is somehow connected to these issues for mental and behavioral health. I don't think we can completely divorce the role of police from certain types of crisis calls, but I think everyone understands that they want law enforcement to have a reduced role and focus on crime. This is especially true for these types of calls that, quite frankly, are not a criminal or safety matter that officers can address. There are folks better equipped to do that. There are professionals better equipped to do that. And we need to focus on them. I've seen the county launch a new A3 response model that could work in tandem on mental health calls. And I fully support that model. It's called Anyone, Anywhere, Anytime. And it needs a partnership with law enforcement to provide the appropriate mental health responses at those in crisis and bring law enforcement only when needed. And I want to see a 24-hour response model for when law enforcement is needed, not just a small ancillary model that is currently being provided.
You talked about mental health, you talked about accountability, but I want to bring up very specifically the case of Andrew Hall, a source of controversy in the community and certainly as we move forward in several elections. Of course, Andrew Hall was convicted and sentenced to 6 years for the death of Vladimir Arboleda in November of 2018. The sheriff has said that when he looks at this case, it's not just a strictly mental health case or a strictly officer-involved case. Can you give me your thoughts on that case and how the department and the community can move forward?
No, absolutely. The issue is having good management, good policies and procedures that does not put law enforcement into these types of scenarios to begin with. And that's what I want to focus on. I want to focus on ensuring that deputies and the public are not having interactions that are negative. And I think most people in the public did not view this as an interaction that should have occurred. And I think that's the main focus on moving forward on what has to happen. We can't change the past, but moving forward, those are the types of things, that type of leadership is what we need to ensure that the policies and procedures that are done on the street by the deputies, happens, from the top down, and that they come with a level of competency that keeps everyone safe, but keeps negative interactions at a minimum. And I think that's where people want to be. And then for accountability purposes, there are going to be times when people in law enforcement mess up. We're not perfect, and but we have to take accountability for that. And then we need to be transparent in our actions. Hiding a video of critical incidents for over a year, that's not the 21st century policing, and that's not what the public expects. And I want to change that. I want to ensure that we put video evidence, documents out to the public, data out to the public as soon as possible. And because I think that's really just the expectation in this day and age, and that's fine. I think we in law enforcement need to be okay with that, and I am.
Okay, I want to talk about crime because certainly that is a big issue and a big concern for the community. We remember the mob-style robberies we saw in San Francisco, Walnut Creek, and certainly smash and grabs in malls like the Sun Valley Mall. Can you talk about how you would address that and how you deal with the safety concerns, really not even just those robberies, but all the other thefts and crimes that we are seeing?
We need more deputies on the street, period. Unfortunately, most of the deputies in the way the office is managed, currently most of them work in jails or court security, and they're not certified to work out in the community on patrol. That's led to major service disruptions and slow 911 response. And we need to change that. There's too many deputies working mandatory overtime, and I don't think that's sustainable or quality management of resources. And too many people have complained throughout the county that, and to a point where they don't even call anymore. And that's been in previous fiscal years, reductions in calls for service, actually. And that's alarming because I think people are losing faith in that. So what I want to do is ensure that air patrol services are adequate and go beyond where they are currently at, since crime is on the rise. And we need solutions to that. And my solution would be to ensure that all deputies are trained when they come through the front door at the Contra Costa Sheriff's Office in patrol and community policing, so that they can be available to do that. Those who are already working, who don't want to work in patrol, I will try to incentivize those folks to go out there and do that work. But it would require a change in the culture of the Sheriff's Office. But I think long-term, that's the best thing to do, is to increase the amount of deputies in patrol, how beats are managed and staffed, so that people get the response that they deserve.
Well, we have just a few moments left, but can you just give me an idea of where the department stands now in your mind, and how far it has to go to get to a point that you think it should be?
I think it has, unfortunately, a long way to wait, and that's no fault of the deputies. That is a management issue, and that's where everything needs to focus at. If organizations are successful or fail because of what happens at the top, it transcends all the way down to the bottom. And there are people out there doing great work every single day on the ground. And they need help from the folks at the top, the people who are leading, to actually lead, be again in front, on the cutting edge, having the experience to actually use things that are modern and focus on moving forward. And good leaders make good decisions. Experience should lead you to make good decisions as a law enforcement leader.
Benjamin
But if
Terrio,
your experience isn't leading to good decisions, then the public should question that experience.
It's because you have 2 minutes left for a closing statement. I don't want to take away any time from that for you, so I'm just going to cut you off here. You can, of course, finish your thought in your closing statement, but let me give you your 2 minutes now.
Contra Costa deserves law enforcement leadership that leads by example, not one that follows. Imagine an old Oregon Trail type wagon wheel. The sheriff's office is the center of that wheel. It is the hub. It's the part that connects everything else in county law enforcement. And that's why it must lead in law enforcement. Unfortunately, the sheriff is not led. There could have been body cameras in 2016, like the rest of the cities. Instead, it's 2022, and the public has had to wait for an election to get them. The sheriff's office sent senior commanders to understand mental health evaluation teams in 2013. And now in 2016, we passed on an opportunity to implement the program, while Contra Costa cities jumped at the chance to change their mental health response. The first county MET officer started just last year. Good leaders, like I said, make good decisions. Experience should lead you to make good decisions. And if your experience isn't leading to good decisions, then the public should question that experience. We need appropriate responses to mental and behavioral health. We need to partner alongside those professionals who are equipped to do that work. Leaders understand that every family wants their children to be able to play outside safely, and I want that for my daughter, and I want that for your family too. And as sheriff, I'm committed to restructuring our organization to be flexible to respond to the 911 emergency calls that need a ride. You deserve a sheriff that believes and will hold himself accountable to you, and I'm committed to a level of access that allows you to see what occurs in the sheriff's office and allows your voice to be heard. You deserve a sheriff who respects our criminal justice system and recognizes the importance of transparency and reform. A leader with a policing approach and sensitivity appropriate for the 21st century. Let's move forward together into a safer future for Contra Costa. Thank you.
All right. Benjamin Terrio, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time and answering all these questions that we had. And this does conclude our discussion with Benjamin Terrio, who is running for sheriff of Contra Costa County. To view this broadcast online, go to www.cocovote.us. I'm Claudine Wong from KTVU Channel 2 News. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to vote on June 7th.